The time must come when the imperative necessity for the holding of a vast and all-embracing assemblage of men will be universally realized. The rulers and kings of the earth must needs attend it, and, participating in its deliberations, must consider such ways and means as will lay the foundations of the world's great peace amongst men. Such a peace demandeth that the great powers should resolve, for the sake of the tranquillity of the peoples of the earth, to be fully reconciled among themselves. Should any king take up arms against another, all should unitedly arise and prevent him. If this be done, the nations of the world will no longer require any armaments, except for the purpose of preserving the security of their realms and of maintaining internal order within their territories. This will ensure the peace and composure of every people, government, and nation. Baha'u'llah. So now I will introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to save all your questions until after the talk when we'll have our question and answer portion. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I'll put in the chat and the description of our YouTube video. Our speaker this week is Dr. Augusto Lopez Claros, and his topic is the emerging outlines of a new global governance architecture. Augusto Lopez Claros is an international economist and the executive director of the Global Governance Forum. He has published several books on global governance reform and is currently spearheading the Global Governance Forum's drafting of a second United Nations Charter. He brings more than 30 years of experience in international organizations, including most recently as director of the Global Indicators Group at the World Bank. Previously, he was chief economist at the World Economic Forum. Before joining the forum, he worked for several years in the financial sector in London, with a special focus on emerging markets. He was the International Monetary Fund's resident representative in Russia during the 1990s. He has also been a senior fellow at the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Educated in England and the United States, he received a diploma in mathematical statistics from Cambridge University and a PhD in economics from Duke University. Recent publications include Removing Impediments to Sustainable Economic Development, The Case of Corruption, Equality for Women Equals Prosperity for All, and Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century. His book, Global Governance and International Cooperation, Managing Global Catastrophic Risks in the 21st Century, co-edited with Richard Falk, has just been published by Routledge. He has lectured at some of the world's leading universities, think tanks, and international organizations. A list of recent lectures can be found at www.augustolopezclaros.com. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Lopez Claros.
Thank you, Bayan, for that very nice introduction. And also thank you for choosing such an appropriate quote from the writings of the founder of the Baha'i Faith, to serve as the background for the thoughts that I want to share with you over the next half an hour or so. The idea that we need to be thinking about how to strengthen the mechanisms of international cooperation is something that is gaining ground, year after year. I have been working in this space, for many years, and there seems to be a very direct correlation between the unraveling of our existing world order and the institutions that underpin this order on the one hand, and people's willingness to listen to and to investigate, new proposals and new ideas on how to improve the global governance architecture that came out of World War II. Essentially, just to take a kind of a 1 minute path towards our recent history, the last time that we seriously considered amending or rethinking our architecture for global governance and the institutions and mechanisms for international cooperation was actually in 1945, when the United Nations was adopted. I'm looking at our calendar. Today is June 7th. On June 26th, mere 20 days from now, 19 days from now, we will actually be commemorating the 80th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Charter at a conference in San Francisco. Indeed, on that day, next June 26th, I will be speaking to the United Nations Association in San Francisco because they are holding an event to commemorate that 80th anniversary. And I want to share um, something that President Truman said at the closing of that conference on June 26, 1945. He was basically holding in his hand a copy of the UN Charter. And he said, this charter, like our own constitution, will be expanded and improved as time goes on. And then he explained that this document was going to be a living document, that it would be amended as circumstances in the world change, in due course. And he used the example of the U.S. Constitution that by then had been amended some 20 times, since its adoption in 1787. So that was a very powerful, powerful idea. And it was an idea that was very well received by the representatives of the 51 nations that were gathered at that conference and adopted the UN Charter. As a Baha'i, for me, it is really quite fascinating to, to go back to 1931 and to share with you something that was said by Shoghi Effendi, who was then the head of the Baha'i community. Um, this is actually a quote that I shared yesterday in Vienna, in Austria, because I was a keynote speaker at a digital forum organized by the Austrian Institute of Technology. And what Shoghi Effendi said in 1931 is a kind of a echo in a kind of a backward chronological sense of what Truman would say, 14 years later in San Francisco. He said, the fundamental cause of world unrest is our failure to adjust our system of economic and political institutions to the imperative needs of a rapidly evolving age. Again, the same idea, institutions to remain relevant, to be empowered to address the challenges of our time, they have to evolve, they have to adapt to changing circumstances. That was true in 1931. How much more true it is today in 2025 when the world has changed in so many different ways. Um, Even in 1945, the UN Charter was a document which one could characterize as being pre-nuclear. That is, it was adopted before the explosions of nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was pre-climate because in 1945, climate change was not really in our radar. And it was pre-digital because, we hadn't really entered yet the age of rapid technological and scientific innovation and change, right? And furthermore, contrary to the promise made by President Truman, contrary to the principle laid out by Shoghi Effendi 14 years before about the need for institutions to be adapted to changing circumstances, the UN Charter has never been amended. It remains the same document that it was 80 years ago. And for that very reason, it is not fit for purpose. It does not allow us to address the challenges that we face. So, what are those challenges that we face today? It might be useful to just give you a bit of a sense so that you have an idea of what is the pathway ahead of us in the next few years and maybe a decade or two or longer. I don't know. I'm not a prophet. I don't know how long it will take to bring into being a modern, effective, global governance architecture. But we'll come to that in a few minutes. Well, surely what is happening on the climate change side has got to be one of the, great challenges and risks that we face today. Um, the scientists are saying that we are essentially failing in our attempts, our feeble attempts to reduce emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. And contrary to the expectation embedded in the 2015 Paris Agreement, emissions have continued to rise year after year since then, with the possible exception of 2020 because of COVID and the associated collapse of the global economy. And so here we have an area of deep, deep worry, deep, deep concern. The scientists are alarmed at the lack of action on the part of government, civil society, the business community. They say with increasing vehemence that sea levels are going to rise, that we're going to have a new kind of refugee, environmental refugees. These are people who are no longer going to be able to live on the coasts, which today house more than 1 billion people, are now going to have to move inland. Or in the case of several Pacific islands who are members of the United Nations, they are sovereign nations, they will disappear. They will disappear because they will be covered by rising sea levels, and those populations are going to have to find a home elsewhere in other parts of the planet. So these things are coming our way, and we remain largely unable to cope with these problems. Of course, there are things going on in many parts of the world. I live in Europe, and the European Union has led the way in terms of reducing emissions, investing in new technologies, investing in wind and solar energy and renewable energy in general. But the European Union, although it is a powerful economic agent, although it is the largest trading bloc in the world, it cannot do these things alone. It needs the cooperation of China, of India, of the United States, of other countries that are growing, that are big, and that are also contributing to emissions, right? So this is one area. Interestingly, this question of climate and sort of protecting the environment is something that is very much embedded in the writings of many of the old religious traditions. The Prophet Muhammad, just to give you a couple of examples, said, and I quote, "The world is green and beautiful, and God has appointed you his stewards over it." So Muhammad already was uh, 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 basically saying that we should manage the world in a way that was responsible. And the first Muslim caliph, Abu Bakr, said, this is one of the oral traditions of the Prophet, he said, "Do not cut down a tree, do not abuse a river, do not harm animals, and be always kind and humane to God's creation, even to your enemies." Again, this idea that we have to manage our surrounding environment, our climate, our planet Earth in a way that is respectful, that is sustainable, is embedded in the religious traditions of many, many faiths. And of course, the Baha'i faith is not an exception. You can look into the Baha'i writings and you will also see those thoughts expressed. In fact, I have in front of me a book that was written by Al Gore, former Vice President Al Gore, already some 30 years ago. It was called Earth in the Balance. And in that book, I will just share it with you because I thought this was fascinating. In fact, I had an opportunity to meet with him a few years ago, and we discussed his quoting of the Baha'i writings in this book in connection with the environment. He said, uh, one of our newest of the great universalist religions, the Baha'i Faith, founded in 1863 in Persia by Mirza Hussein Ali, warns us not only to properly regard the relationship between humankind and nature, but also the one between civilization and the environment. Um, I don't want to quote longer because I don't want this presentation to be overly long, but I just want to share with you that the concern for the environment and protecting the environment is very much part of the religious tradition of most faiths. So that's one problem. But there are other risks that confront humanity and for which create the need for rethinking our systems of cooperation and rethinking the way we organize ourselves globally at the international level to confront these global challenges. The other one, of course, I think that is very much present in the minds of people today is the whole question of security, peace, the idea that we have entered in the last few years a period of rising militarism and nationalisms and great power tensions and the geopolitics today are very, very toxic. We have wars in Ukraine. We have a very unsettled situation in Gaza. We have massive violations of basic freedoms and human rights in countries like Iran. Iran is a regime that not only discriminates against religious minorities like the Bahá'í Faith, it also has a very backward medieval regime that discriminates against half of the population, women, by imposing all kinds of restrictions on them that make it very difficult for them to enjoy equality of property rights, access to the job market, and so on and so forth, right? And this is this particular issue, is widespread in many different parts of the world. So this is obviously one serious problem that we have to confront. And the quote read by Bayan at the very beginning of this event, of this meeting, namely the idea that countries have to come together and build up a system of collective security so that we can move away from the current system where countries have to invest massively in armaments and in weapons because they feel threatened by their neighbors, they feel threatened by other countries. And we end up, of course, spending vast amounts of resources in a system which is eventually will have no winners, right? We already know we have 9 nuclear powers where these international geopolitical tensions precipitate a nuclear war. All of humanity will lose. It will cause great deal of disruption and suffering to humanity. And so what was the recipe given by the founder of the Baha'i Faith to this situation, already anticipated by him in the 19th century? It was to create a system of collective security, which basically means to create something like an international peace force that would have the monopoly on the use of power and the use of force in international relations between states. This idea, you might think, well, that is utopian. No, my friends, it was embedded in Article 43 of the United Nations Charter. The United Nations Charter actually anticipates member states giving to the Security Council soldiers and weapons and all the necessary instruments that are necessary to protect peace and to protect populations from the aggression of nations who are violating the principles of the UN Charter, which actually forbid war. So there you go. That's another area. And of course, there are others. We live in a world in which there is too much poverty, too much inequality. These issues have mutated and from simply being economic and social problems, they have now become political problems. For me, as a Baha'i, as an economist, it has always been very interesting, very fascinating to examine the teachings of the Baha'i Faith on the issue of poverty and on the issue of inequality. And it's worth saying a couple of things because these are global problems. These are things that would be part of amending and improving our global governance architecture. On the issue of poverty, for instance, there is no reason today in an economy, a global economy that is producing goods and services valued at $115 trillion, right? The highest level ever since we have begun to collect the statistics, and possibly the highest level ever since the dawn of humanity. To have 800 million children who are malnourished, to have roughly the same number of people who live in extreme poverty, who don't have access to electricity, who don't have access to basic, services like potable water and sewage and so on, and therefore who live on the edge of survival. Um, it is just an embarrassment. It is a shame that in the context of a great deal of wealth and abundance and the technologies that could actually help us solve poverty, in a very, very short period of time, we at the same time live in a world in which there is a great deal of poverty. Abdul Baha, when he was traveling in Paris in 1912, he spoke very strongly about extreme poverty. He said that it was degrading and demoralizing. Those are the words that he used. And he hoped that the economic system would be amended and improved and reformed in a way that would eliminate poverty permanently forever, because there was no need for it to exist as a feature of our global economy. And that was in 1912, more than 100 years ago. How much more so today, because we have the means, because we have in fact reduced poverty in a big way in the last 100 years. But of course, we still have large pockets of extreme poverty in Africa, in India, and many other parts of the world. And then Abdul Baha also spoke with great eloquence, I would like to say with passion, especially when he was traveling in America, about the problem of inequality. He said that if inequality was allowed to persist as a problem, it would undermine the social and the political stability of nations. And we already see this happening. And the sad thing about inequality is that it is something that we have the tools and the instruments to address in a very effective way. And some countries have been quite successful in some parts of the world in reducing equality, in, to use the words of Abdul Baha, narrowing the extremes of wealth and poverty, so that we will not have people who suffer degrading and demoralizing poverty, and so that we will not have people that accumulate vast wealth, well beyond anything that could conceivably be regarded as necessary for their living and for their comfort and so on, and for their economic security, right? So the Baha'i Faith advocates amending the economic system, changing the economic paradigm in a way that will narrow the huge gap which exists today, the growing gap that exists today between the very poor and the very rich. And we put forward these proposals not just based on ethical grounds, although that is enough to justify those proposals, but we also do it on political grounds. In other words, to safeguard the governability of the planet, to safeguard political stability, to safeguard democracy, to safeguard human rights. So there are other global problems and challenges that we face, but they all come in some form or other. They all bring us to the same issue, which is that we need to go back to something like the UN Charter in 1945, which established the basis of international cooperation, which created a number of important organizations that are very much at the center of the mechanisms that we use to address these global problems, but which are no longer adequate, and we need to reform them. We need to bring them into the 21st century. We need to turn these organizations into effective instruments to manage crisis, to protect people, to move the world from the current situation of poverty, inequality, insecurity, to a world in which we have safety, we have peace, we have opportunity for growth and for development. This is a project in which I have been engaged in the last few years through the Global Governance Forum, which is an organization of which I am the director. I have been working with a group of leading experts to essentially think up how would the UN Charter look like today in the 21st century if we wanted to modernize the system of international cooperation, and make turn it into a problem-solving system rather than a system that is there in the background, ineffective and on the verge of collapse. I go back to the very nice quote which Bayan shared with us at the very beginning of this presentation, um, in which he quotes the founder of the Bahá'í Faith, who says that the time would come when the leaders of the world would recognize the need to come together to essentially draft a new charter, to come up with a new system, with a new legal basis that would strengthen our ability to cooperate at international level, so that we can address these challenges. This is to me the most important challenge of the 21st century. If we succeed in doing this in some measure, I think that we have a chance of mitigating some of the calamities that are otherwise coming our way in coming years and decades. If we fail, if we continue on the current path of inaction, of inertia, of indifference, of ignorance, then I think that there is a very good chance that we might be essentially overwhelmed by crisis in coming years and in coming decades, and those themselves, of course, will precipitate the changes in human consciousness. They will shift our attention and will probably create the conditions for us to do then what the founder of the Baha'i Faith was advising us to do back in the 19th century, which is to come together and to begin to establish the basis for a new system of cooperation on a global scale to address these risks and to address these global problems. So for me, in a way, that is the challenge that we face in coming years and in coming decades. Which way do we go? The end point is the same. The end point is the same. And in that perspective, I think that the Baha'i Faith offers a vision of the future that is very positive, very constructive, very inspiring, actually. The founder of the Baha'i Faith says that humanity has entered the age of maturity, that we will learn from our mistakes, and that we will move to a new age of development in which we will reallocate the resources which now go to war, to violence, to protect the existing system, which is clearly bankrupt. We will move to an age in which we will allocate these resources for human development, for educating our children, for protecting us from things like COVID-19 in 2020, which found us completely unprepared. In 2020, we had powerful armies, we had thousands of nuclear weapons, but we didn't have enough hospital beds, we didn't have respirators, we didn't have the instruments that were necessary to mitigate the impact of that pandemic, right? So we need to shift our focus into a vision of human security that is very much delinked from militarism and is more focused on human development. The founder of the Baha'i Faith back in the 19th century, in 1892 to be precise, he had a very interesting meeting with Edward Brown. Edward Brown was a professor at Cambridge University. He was a very famous Orientalist. He spoke Arabic and Persian perfectly. He was a great scholar, and he was very familiar with the region and had been traveling in Persia and in the Middle East for decades. And eventually in 1892, he visited the Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, while he was there still in captivity. And they had a series of meetings. And Edward Brown, because he had a very gifted pen, he was a very gifted writer, was able to convey some of the sense of this conversations with the founder of the Baha'i Faith. And in the account that he has left for posterity, he quotes something that Baha'u'llah said to him. And it's a very, very how can I say, it's a kind of a sad commentary on the kind of world that we were living in the 19th century. And what is particularly sad and sobering is that not much has changed actually since that time, more than 100 years ago. In that encounter, uh, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, laments the fact that kings and rulers, the leaders of the world, are spending their resources in the construction of machinery of war that will only lead to the destruction of humanity, rather than in that which would be conducive to the happiness of mankind. Uh, Maybe it was part of the conversation they had. We don't know. Edward Brown didn't elaborate on what he meant by that which would be conducive to the happiness of mankind. But luckily, we do have other writings of the founder in which, of course, he does indicate that which is conducive to the happiness of mankind, and are exactly the kinds of things that you would think are expanding the frontiers of knowledge, that means through education, empowering our young people so that they have opportunities to grow and to develop their skills. It means investing in science so that we have the capacity to address the challenges that are before us on the basis of knowledge and understanding and know-how. And so on. Those are the things that are conducive to the happiness of mankind. And he tells Brown that humanity must therefore move in that direction of redirecting resources towards those things that have to do with human development. And so, in the vision of global order that the Baha'i Faith presents for the future, there is that endpoint. The endpoint will be um, the beginning of a new age in the evolution of mankind that will see huge, vast development of our capacities, and essentially, to use a phrase from the Baha'i writings, the emergence of a new race of men and women, empowered through the changes that will happen. So the end point is there. The pathway, it can be a pathway of wisdom and collaboration and inspired leadership and all of us working together so that we avoid the calamities and the needless suffering that would come as a result of ignorance and inertia, or it will be a somewhat more painful path, and we don't know. We hope that it will be the first, not the second, because the first is much less involves a lot less disruption and suffering. Okay. I will stop here, Bayan, and I think perhaps we can open it up to Q&A. I have in a one or two previous invitations to this very nice event. I seem to remember that you have a very active and very inquisitive audience, so I'm very happy to comment on any questions that they may have.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Lopez Claros. This is a really, it's sobering but inspiring look at the future of global governance. And I'm sure everybody here and everybody watching later appreciates it a lot. We have one question that asks, Baha'u'llah spoke of a future world commonwealth. Do you think we are seeing the preliminary forms of this now, or is what is emerging still fundamentally incomplete?
Thank you. That's a very good question. It's a question on which I think we can allow ourselves to do a little bit of hopefully enlightened speculation, right? I live in Europe, and I live in Spain in particular, and Spain is a member of the European Union, which is a group of 27 nations that have come together and that have created a very impressive institutional machinery for international cooperation. If you ask me, is the European Union and the institutions of the European Union a possible pattern, a possible model for a future world commonwealth? My guarded answer to that question is yes, yes. Because it isn't just, nations, sort of cooperating in an informal way on issues of common interest. No, they actually have built up the institutions that make that cooperation meaningful, binding, possible. There is a European Parliament. It is elected every 5 years. The members of the European Parliament are elected in national elections in the individual countries, the 27 countries. These parliamentarians then go on and they serve for 5-year periods, and they do legislation that is binding on the 27 members of the European Union. That is very much in the spirit of a recommendation that was made by Abdul Baha in 1919 in the Tablet of The Hague, where he advocated the creation of a World Parliamentary Assembly, right? Well, the Europeans have done it. It's not world, it's regional. It does not include all 193 members of the United Nations. It includes 27 members, but that number has been growing. For many, many years, well, the European Union started with 6 countries, then started expanding, enlarging, as they say. And today it has 27 members, and there are many countries that are on the queue to join in coming years, Ukraine being one of them. Right? So they have a European Court of Justice whose decisions, again, are binding on the member countries. They have a European Central Bank that issues a common currency. Interest rates are not set in Spain or Italy or Germany or France. Interest rates are set by the European Central Bank at its headquarters, which happens to be in Frankfurt, Germany, but the German representative on the board of the European Central Bank is just one among 27, right? So for me, these developments are very encouraging, very, very encouraging. And if you ask me, will the European Union 10 years from now have something like a European Defense Force, a European army? I think the chances are high. They don't yet have that, but I think that the war in the Ukraine has persuaded them that they need to join forces and they need to move more quickly. So now they jump from that to a world commonwealth, to a vision of that kind of institutional infrastructure on a global scale. That will take time. It will take time because the world is very diverse, and we have a disparity of income levels, different stages of development, and so on. But what could happen is that just as the European Union has done this within the European continent, you could see other countries doing the same within their regions. There is an organization called the African Union, and the African Union, of course, hasn't gone as far as the European Union in terms of developing the institutions, but it is a group of heads of state and countries that come together and increasingly discuss issues of international cooperation. And you could do the same in Asia, you could do the same in Latin America. So I think that there is a pattern, there is a trend, there is a sense of direction, right? And I think the 21st century will be very much defined by these kinds of initiatives at strengthening international cooperation, perhaps initially at the regional level and then later on at the global level.
Thank you. Another question asks, would you kindly include the importance of the spiritual element needed to achieve the unity mentioned to change the charter rather than the usual economical aspects?
Well, the spiritual, moral, ethical dimension, of course, is very much present there, right? And religions have contributed, religious traditions have contributed a great deal to provide us with the spiritual justifications for international cooperation and collaboration, right? Let me, we, there is a gap between the insights that have been already given to us by science, in particular by biology, about the existence of a single human family called the human race, right? And our understanding of those scientific insights, right? It always takes us, I don't know, several decades before we catch up and we internalize in our education systems and in our attitudes insights that have come from science. But science has already established there is only one human family. Right? The racial differences that on the basis of which we sometimes have prejudices and fight against each other and do not love and respect each other are completely imaginary. The human genome has already established that we are, genetically speaking, 99.9% the same as other people in other remote corners of the planet. Uh, the color of our skin is something that reflects environmental conditions, right? It reflects the latitude in which we live. If we live in, near the equator, our skins are darker because we're more exposed to the sun. If we live in northern latitudes, our skins are fairer for exactly the same reasons. But the genetic makeup, who we are as individuals, have already established that we are just a member of one human family. Therefore, the statement made by Baha'u'llah in his writings, the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. You are the leaves of one tree, you are the drops of one ocean, you are the fruits of one tree. All these things, underlie this idea of our common humanity, right? And what we have failed at is in amending and modernizing our systems of education so that we teach our children that their first allegiance, their first sense of identification should be with the human family, with humanity, not with their particular tribe, whatever that tribe may be. Jewish, Christian, Muslim, black, white, yellow, men, women, rich, poor, all those distinctions are irrelevant because we come from the same stock, we come from the same creator, we come from the same, we have the same genetic makeup. When we teach that to our children, when we internalize that and we aim to behave according to those insights, then I think we will see a rebirth and a spiritualization of mankind. And that is also foretold in the Baha'i writings.
Thank you. Another question asks, we often speak of the past and the future, but what can a Baha'i do right now in this present moment to avoid simply being a passive observer of the world's unfolding processes? How can we take concrete action today?
Oh, I can think of many ways. Well, first of uh, all of us Baha'is, Christians, Jews, regardless of where we live, you know, unless we happen to be in government and have some very senior position in government, a minister or a member of a cabinet or a head of state, which is a very tiny minority of the world's population. The vast majority of the human family are part of what I call civil society, right? And civil society is a very important player in today's world. Civil society organizations have a power and influence that they have not had for decades. Um, in part, this is because governments are very much focused on managing the crisis today. They are managing on, getting elected, preserving their hold on power. But when change comes, it usually comes as a result of initiatives taken by civil society organizations. Um, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons in 2017 has already been adopted by more than 100 countries, and this was started as a civil society organization. Jody Williams, a great American woman, she was responsible for the landmines treaty some 25 years ago. she started out that by working with other women, other civil society organizations, and eventually turned that into a treaty, which then became an international treaty with the support of a number of governments like Canada and others, right? So we can team up, we can join forces with other organizations, to become to put pressure on governments to begin to move in the direction of doing these things, taking better care of the environment, changing policies in a way that is more respectful of the environment, and so on. For you, many of whom you are in North America, you are members of a democracy. Please, if you have concerns that your government is not paying enough attention to X, Y, or Z, whatever those causes may be, you know, caring for the environment, human rights, gender equality, racial equality, and so on, please write to your representatives. All of you live in jurisdictions where you have a representative, looking after your interests in the House of Representatives. Write to them, engage with them, let them know of your concerns, be an active citizen. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, said something which I think, for me anyway, has been a powerful guide in my own personal life. He said, be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age in which you live, right? In other words, as you survey the world, as you look at the world's conditions, don't be indifferent. Don't withdraw yourself and into a cocoon. No, to be actually concerned with the needs of the age in which we live means, in practice, writing to your congressman. Uh, if there are things that are of concern to you, if you think that your country, your district, your state, whatever, is going in the wrong direction, let your views know. Your letters can become part of a flood, which then will show your political representatives, what are the needs of society and where you think the country is going in the wrong direction. Don't be indifferent, in other words. Don't just say, oh, those politicians, they're all corrupt. All they care about is re-election. All they care about is campaign contributions and so on and so forth. Don't become a cynic. Don't become a pessimist. No, take a positive attitude and respond to this urge of the founder of the Baha'i Faith to be concerned with the needs of the age in which you live. That may mean, in practice, writing to your politicians and letting your views know and expressing your concerns so that we begin to create a constituency for change.
Thank you. Another question asks, what would happen if a country chose to be sovereign and opted out of the global governance, like the UK opted out of the European Union? Would force be used to make them comply?
Um, the European Union was the 28th member of the European Union, and in 2016 they had a referendum, and then within a few years the referendum was, do we stay in, do we stay out? It was a highly politicized debate. There was a lot of disinformation and misuse of information. And what's the story? 9 years later, when they do polling in England and they ask them, do you think that it was a mistake to have left the European Union? Two-thirds of the population are saying that they think it was a mistake and that the UK should re-enter and go back. I don't think that will happen anytime soon, but it's interesting, that people realize that um, leaving the European Union was a profound act of self-harm. It was profoundly damaging. The United Kingdom, as a result of it, is a less prosperous country. It has removed itself from a forum where they had a great deal of influence to shape their own future. And now they are voiceless and they are basically standing on their own, and they're discovering that being part of a much larger set of nations, strengthens your hand and makes the delivery of peace and prosperity and security much easier than it does being on your own. All right. So they learned their bitter lesson. And it's interesting, when they left the European Union back in 2020, actually, the referendum was in 2016, but it took several years to implement it. Many countries were, for a while, they contemplated doing the same, that those plans have died completely. There is not a single of the 27 members of the European Union who at the moment is planning to have a referendum to see whether they would leave, because they've realized the calamity that it has been for the UK. And so they've said, forget it, we're not going to go that way. So in a perverse way, the UK taught a lesson to all the other members that they should stay in. Bayam, there appear to be a few people who'd like to ask questions verbally rather than through the chat. So I noticed that there was a message in the chat, and I leave that to you. Um,
Yeah, we usually don't do verbal questions because it takes time away from the speaker to be able to answer. But the next question asks, what kind of influence does the Baha'i Faith currently have within global institutions? Have there been any instances where the Universal House of Justice has been invited to offer guidance or moderation on specific issues by any national government?
The Baha'i Faith, our organization, has had a presence in deliberations within the UN system since the early days of the United Nations in the 1940s. The Baha'i international community, um, which has an office in New York, literally a walking distance from UN headquarters, it has for many, many decades had consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. And in that capacity, it has collaborated very, very closely with the UN. We have been participants in UN conferences. We have sometimes sat in committees that were planning or sort of making up the program for some UN summits. Let me give you an example. I think it's a very dramatic example, and many Baha'is are not familiar with this, right? But it highlights the enormous influence which the Baha'i international community has had within the UN system, and the seriousness which the views of the Baha'i community are taken into account, and the extent to which they are respected, right? So this is the example I will give you. It's a bit of an anecdote, but it has the benefit of being true. In the year 2000, that's already 25 years ago, there was the Millennium Summit, which was the largest ever at that time summit of heads of state, who descended in New York in September of 2000 to basically discuss, the global problems and to launch what then were called the Millennium Development Goals. All right. Ahead of that summit, in May of that year, the Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, invited something like 1,500 civil society organizations to come to New York to meet for 2 weeks and to discuss, global problems, environment, climate change, human rights, gender equality, inequality, poverty, and so on. These 1,500 organizations met for 2 weeks and eventually came up with a set of recommendations for the September summit of the heads of state. When these representatives of these more than 1,000 organizations decided who is going to take these recommendations to the heads of state in September, we need to choose a spokesperson who will speak on behalf of all of us. They chose the Baha'i representative, the head of the Baha'i international community, to be the person to take the recommendations of this global conglomeration of civil society organizations to the heads of state in September. I wanted to share this with you because it is an indication of the high respect and regard with which civil society organizations in the world, regard the Baha'i international community and its positions on many of these global issues.
Thank you. Another question asks, what developments and trends in modern cosmopolitan society are raising people's consciousness about humanity's common identity?
The last bit about
Are raising people's consciousness about humanity's common identity.
I think that some of it is certainly coming from uh, the insights that are coming from genetics and biology, little by little, trickling down, right, through our educational system and through our, sort of culture, number one. Number two, of course, um, if you ask yourself, um, what was the cost of a 3-minute telephone call in the 1950s and 60s, right? It turns out it was very costly to make an international telephone call, 40, 50 years ago. What was the cost of crossing the Atlantic by air in, let's say, in percent of your monthly salary? It was sky high. You needed to save a lot of money during many, many months to be able to travel, to Italy from the United States, say, right? So come to the 21st, to 2025. Um, Cost of a 3-minute telephone call across the world, zero, right? You can use WhatsApp and you can communicate with any other human being, any other part of the planet, and it doesn't cost you anything. Cost of international travel drastically reduced because, well, that's the nature. We have prospered. We make more money today than we did 40, 50 years ago, and the cost of travel has come down. So tourism has increased. Let me give you a dramatic example about the country where I live, Spain. When I was a young economist many, many years ago, working at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, I was the economist for Spain. And at that time, the number of tourists coming to Spain was 43 million, right? Or 40 million, which was roughly the size of the Spanish population, right? So what is the number of tourists coming to Spain every year today? It's 83 million, right? Twice the population of the country. What does it mean, that Spain receives 83 million people every year as tourists? It means that there is a great deal more interaction between peoples all over the world. I was in Vienna yesterday because I was giving a talk at an international digital forum organized by the Austrian Institute of Technology. I was the keynote speaker on the morning session. When I went down to my room for breakfast, ahead of me on the queue to enter the restaurant, there was a large group of Chinese, right? Um, why? Well, because Vienna is a beautiful city, because the Chinese are a large group of a large share of the world's population, and they're traveling because they have prospered in the last several decades. And as they travel, as they go around the world, as their students come and study in the United States and learn English, all of these interactions contribute to bring people together, to get to know each other, to understand each other, to see that we're not from different planets, we're part of the same family. We respond to the same incentives. We all want to live in a world where the water that we drink is not going to poison us. We all want to live in a world in which there is rule of law, in which we don't have two sets of rules, one for the rich, one for the poor. We want to live in a world in which we have peace and security, in which we're not going to have a nuclear war, and on and on and on. I could give you so many examples which are through these interactions, travel, communication, tourism, and so on, are showing us, hey, we're all one human family, right? And so I think that is the answer to your question. And this is not going to change. It's only going to intensify. There will be more interaction between different corners of the world, and greater recognition, especially by the young, right? That we're just part of the same unique human family occupying one planet, the planet Earth.
Thank you. Another question asks, the Baha'i Faith discourages political engagement. So how do you reconcile that with lobbying your local politicians?
Discourages what sort of engagement?
Political.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little anecdote. Many years ago, I was invited to a dinner, and Al Gore was part of that dinner, and we were assigned to the same table. It was a table of about 8 people. So this was in Switzerland. It was a fancy hotel. I came down punctually for the dinner, and when I approached my table, where I knew that I would be sitting, Al Gore was already standing there. And so we had a little friendly chat. And by then, because we had interacted earlier in the day, um, we he knew that I was a member of the Baha'i community. And he said to me, you know, Augusto, I like the Baha'i faith. I have studied it. In fact, I have quoted it in my book, the book from which I quoted half an hour ago. And he said, what I don't like about the Baha'is is that you guys don't vote. And I said, no, 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 Mr. Gore, that is not correct. We Baha'is do vote, right? Um, we discharge our responsibilities as citizens in the countries in which there is democracy and we can vote. I told him what we don't do is we don't join political parties. We don't become partisans. We don't identify ourselves with a particular posture associated with a particular political party, but that is different. We do vote, right? And we are concerned citizens. And we are anxiously concerned with the needs of the age in which we live, to quote the founder of the Baha'i Faith, right? So, so I just want to emphasize that, right? That it is one thing to become part of the political marketplace, right? Especially in the context of a very polarized, political environment, as in the US, as in many other countries, right? But that we should be upstanding citizens, that we should write letters to our congressmen and our senators and express our views and express our concerns and do so in a way that is respectful but constructive. Absolutely, absolutely. And I want you to know there are a number of Baha'is who are ambassadors. They have joined their government, they have joined their diplomatic service, they have risen in the ranks, and they are serving their countries and their countries' interests, representing their countries in other parts of the world. So I just want to guard you against this idea that we're disconnected from the world. We are not. We are very connected with the world, but we're doing it in a way that does not identify us with a particular political inclination. Why? Because there is no political party in the world that would be broad enough to encompass all the Baha'i principles and ideas, right? So why would we join an organization that is going to be necessarily more constraining, less holistic in its approach to the human problems that we face, right?
Thank you. Another question asks, many observers note rising nationalism and populism globally. How do you see these forces interacting with or obstructing the emerging architecture you described?
Yes, Albert Einstein had a very interesting characterization of nationalism. He said nationalism is an infantile disease. It is like the measles of mankind, right? It is a stage that we go through in which we feel insecure about ourselves and we need to identify with a particular tribe, whether it's the American tribe or the Japanese tribe or the Chinese tribe. All right. But this is changing. Nationalism is a dying disease, all right? It affects especially the older generations, who I think have problems or at least find it a little bit more challenging to to question our long-standing prejudices, for whom the color of the skin is very important. It's defining, it's part of their identity, for whom being able to carry a particular passport, whether it be French or Argentinian or American, is a part of their identity, right? But I travel a lot and I interact a lot with young people, and what I find is that young people are largely free of this disease, this infantile disease, and that gives me great hope. Right? Young people understand that we are part of one human family. And so I think that nationalism is actually on its death throes, right? Now, one question which is implicit in the question that has been asked is whether what remains of it is dangerous enough that it could take us to a repetition of what we saw in the 20th century, World War I and World War II, both of which were precipitated by these very fanatic nationalisms. And I don't have the answer to that question, unfortunately. I hope not. I hope not, because of course, a World War III would be infinitely more devastating than World War II. I hope that the younger people in particular, especially as they move into the positions of leadership, as they push out the many of the older politicians and the gerontocrats who are leading many nations in the world, and a new generation of leaders emerges, that they will not fall captive to the missiles of mankind, as Albert Einstein said, nationalism. Okay, one last question, Bayan.
All right. Um, the last question is, how do you differentiate between global governance and global government? Is there a risk of excessive centralization?
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction. Thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. I think that having a global government or a world government, if you wish, is something that is for the long-term future of mankind. If you ask me, if you ask my professional opinion, is this something that will happen in my lifetime? I don't think so. I don't think so, right? I think that I gave the example of the European Union to highlight that there are parts of the world which are moving in the direction of, something that you could characterize as a regional government, right? Something like a United States of Europe. I think that will eventually happen. Whether it happens in my lifetime or not, I don't know. All right. I hope it does. It's not an inconceivable reality, because they have really made such huge progress in the last many decades. But that's different. A world government, I think that's a long-term goal. It's a long-term destination for mankind. It will come as a result of science and technology. It will come as a result of the older generations essentially dying out and being replaced by younger people who have been born into this age of integration and emerging consciousness of global citizenship, right? So yes, that the time will come. In fact, the Baha'i faiths actually say this as a kind of a prophetic statement, Abdul Baha said that the time would come when people will regard themselves as citizens of one common fatherland, he said. And so but whether that happens in practice, within the next 10, 20 years, I don't know. So it is a useful distinction to make. A world government, if it happens, it will be in the longer term. Global governance, which basically means creating institutions and finding mechanisms to collaborate at the international level in more effective ways so that we can address these common problems that we face, that is happening already. We're moving in that direction very, very quickly, and we're doing it partly in response to the sense of alarm that we have about these unresolved problems and the suffering that those unresolved problems could bring to mankind, right? I give you my heartfelt greetings and my affection from Madrid, Spain, and I hope to see you all at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez Claros. So our speaker next week is going to be Mr. Peter Terry. And again, if you are new to this program, or if you're new to the Baha'i Faith and you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat, which is also in the description of our YouTube videos. And these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Bye.